I think I'm here from second farthest away after Peter Kenyon, I believe, coming from Vermont. So I'm really happy to be here and be able to see this amazing part of the world. I came to British Columbia when I was in high school with my parents, but we were just over in Vancouver and Victoria, but I remember just really hoping that I could get back here. So I'm glad I'm here now. And just by a show of hands, how many people in the room are sort of engaged in agricultural work in some way in what they're doing? Okay, so maybe about half, 2/3. That's helpful to know. As Wayne said, my name's Maggie, and I'm honored to be here today really to talk about the power of food and how our small organization is building a community food system. We're celebrating about 30 years of building a food system that supports farmers, takes care of our planet, and nourishes everyone each time they eat. Our mission is to strengthen community food systems, which is, fairly broad, and I'll go into more details about that. So today I'm going to talk about stories from the Intervale's history, including how we approach big problems facing our food system in both Vermont, our region in the Northeast, as well as the whole U.S. and in many ways internationally and across the world. How we imagine the impossible and feel that the beauty and magic of our ideas will be able to become a reality. And I'm also going to share examples of farm success, our programming, our partnerships, as well as policy change. And really, our team, I'm really honored to be able to do a lot of our sharing of our work across the U.S. And I represent, 20 amazing staff people back in the office, and I try to bring back little tidbits, little stories to them of, how our work is influencing people all over the country. So I feel really honored that I get to play that role. And we know that we're just one model of a food system change. So I'm excited to share our stories today, but I also want to underscore that together with all of you, we're all part of a much larger revolution, and I've already learned so much being here about the work specifically related to rural development that you're all doing. So this is a painting of the city of Burlington. Has anyone here been to Burlington? I know one person used to work for the Intervale, which was crazy. Yeah, so a few people. So Burlington, you can see the city blocks here kind of on the bottom. Lake Champlain is there on the left side. And the green and blue along the Winooski River, that's the Intervale, so up in the sort of top right corner. And so Intervale means the land between. It also means the valley where wild onions grow. We have a lot of ramps. And this rendering does a really nice job of showing how kind of our 700 acres, the Intervale itself as a place is 700 acres. We manage 350 acres. How unique it is. So we're 2 miles from City Hall, and we're federally regulated floodplain, and we're also federally regulated an archaeological site of significance. Just to give you a little bit of context, this is a map. You can see we're on the west side of Vermont on Lake Champlain. In Burlington, we're located in the largest city of Vermont. So we're in kind of a funny territory where we get sort of lumped into being both an urban farm as well as being kind of a rural organization because we do work all over the state, and our land looks a lot like the countryside, but it's in the middle of Burlington. We have the only dirt road in the city, which is both fun and kind of can be a pain. So our population in Burlington currently is about 45,000 people. The greater Burlington area is 200,000, and the whole state of Vermont is just over 600,000. And we are probably going to see our first population decline in 2017 that we've seen. I was just meeting with the governor in Vermont, and he told me that. So population decline is something that we are, he's concerned with. So at the Intervale Center, we believe that good food can change the world. We use kind of big, powerful language for a reason. And for 30 years, we've been leading the community food revolution in Vermont and beyond. So we believe that good food and all of the things involved in food, so not only growing food, but moving food, cooking food, disposing of food, kind of celebrating food, has the power to transform the world. And we really see, we want to change the food system from degrading to restorative, anonymous to familiar, and industrial to human scale. So we want to see a food system that, I think this is a different presentation than the one. All right, I'm just going to talk without any photos. So I was going to show you a couple photos of kind of what we see, images that really represent that thing that I was talking about before in terms of the way that we want to see agriculture and what agriculture and land looks like changing. But I'll skip over that and I'll get into talking about the history. So like I was saying, one of the main questions that we get asked, and we get calls from all over the world by organizations who want to replicate what we've done, and people are always asking about the history and about how things got started. So the Intervale as a place has a very long history of agriculture, and we like to honor and tell the stories of what was happening in the Intervale related to agriculture even before we arrived. And so the oldest evidence of human habitation in the Intervale dates back to 4,500 years ago with the Abenaki people who bred and farmed corn in the Intervale. And because we are in a floodplain, and like I was saying, Intervale means land between, so we're right between the Winooski River and Lake Champlain. It's very fertile land, which is why there's been such a strong agricultural history there. So after the corn was being grown there and fishing was happening there, in the 1700s, people started to operate dairies, a piggery, flowers were grown, gladiolas, different fodder for livestock was being grown there. But as Burlington's population began to grow and industrial agriculture began to dominate our food system in our country, the Intervale sort of became this kind of dangerous and reckless place. And it was kind of unwelcoming for visitors. So the story is that Will Rapp, who is our founder, his car was stolen in Burlington, and someone said, "Oh, it's probably down in the Intervale. You should go look in the Intervale. That's where stolen cars get taken and left." And he had been starting this company called Gardener's Supply Company, which is a national gardening company online, still based in Burlington and still in the Intervale. And he went down there and he realized, wow, we have this really amazing resource right within our community. We have 700 acres that are open, that are never going to be developed. They're really fertile soil. At the time, there was dairy farming happening, but the dairy farm was being run by an elderly woman who was not really able to manage all the land anymore. And so a lot of it was there was a lot of homeless encampments. There was car dumps, there was tire dumps, hence Will looking for his car down there. And Bernie Sanders was the mayor of Burlington at the time, and Will went to Bernie and said, we need to revitalize this place. We need to take advantage of this. And so they started doing some programming down there. There was a big cleanup effort with the city employees, with employees of Ben & Jerry's and employees of Gardener Supply, where they picked up, thousands of pounds of tires, and they decided to start doing some composting there. So composting was really at the heart of the work that we did in the early years, in the mid to late 80s. And then we started some community gardening. And at that time, my understanding is that, community garden or CSA, the CSA model was quite new. So it was happening in Germany and Europe. It was happening in California. It was starting to happen in Massachusetts. But some of the community gardeners came together and decided, let's try one of these CSA models. This is happening elsewhere. We don't have this in Vermont yet. And so in about late 1980s, they formed this CSA farm. Did you have a question? Oh, sorry. So a CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture. So the idea is that farmers get money from members, from community people, and they pay up front to help pay for all of the costs throughout the season that the farm has to incur in order to grow whatever they're growing. So traditionally it's vegetables. So I would pay $500 in March, and then I would get a bag or a basket of vegetables every week for 16 weeks or something. And so you're paying once up front, and then you're just paying over time. I can just use this one. Oh, great. So I'm just going to skip ahead to some of these. So going back to kind of the historical piece, you can see, like I said, we're a site of archaeological significance. So basically, if our farmers want to dig up 18 inches or dig down, or build up 18 inches or dig down 18 inches, we either have to get FEMA regulations figured out, or we have to get an archaeological site done. Which can make things a little bit complicated, but is also really interesting. You can see the gladiola pictures and pictures of some Hubbard squash for fodder, and then on the bottom right, you can see the dairy farm that was still there in the 80s. So this is some of the pictures of the abandoned cars. This is Will Rapp cleaning up tires, as I was talking about, in the 80s with assistance from Ben & Jerry's staff, from the city, with support from Bernie Sanders, all that kind of stuff. So the Intervale Center was also founded to address the realities of our global food system. So it was not only about taking advantage of this community resource and helping to improve the community of Burlington, but it was also about addressing, rapid industrialization of food, concerns around human health, environmental challenges that Rapp and the early founders felt could be addressed through sustainable and community-based agriculture. They wanted to address Vermont's loss of local farming and gardening and food production, and our growing reliance on distant industrial food suppliers. So by creating the Intervale Center, they hoped to model a food system that would both create jobs, grow new farmers, as well as rebuild community and feed all of us who love to eat. So just going back briefly. So, these are some of the images that we think about when we think about the representation of farming and agriculture now. So these are our Intervale Farmers. We currently lease land to about 10 farm businesses, and I'll talk more about that program. Our executive director uses this term that they're sort of like the hearth that we gather around in our place. So the farmers are really the heart of what we do. Our organization would not be where it is today and as well known as it is today without the farmers themselves. So it really comes back to a lot of what Peter was talking about and what so many others have been talking about here, and that this asset of human, the beings and sort of community, and they all really believe in this model and continue to keep it thriving. So today, the Intervale houses a unique and innovative community built around growing, eating, and celebrating local food. And we manage land and operate a suite of farm and food programs that stretch across all of Vermont. And so our approach is to harness the power of good food and set in motion new programmatic and business ideas, build community partnerships, and inspire policy that's restorative, human scale, and familiar. And so, as I mentioned earlier, our overarching goal is to strengthen community food systems, and we see doing that through three main goals. And so the three main goals are enhancing the viability of farming, promoting the sustainable use and stewardship of land. So that's both our land as well as land across the state. And then this idea of ensuring community engagement in the food system. And so we have these kind of three images that we feel like represent those three main goals. And the place that I'm going to talk to you about today is a place that really I love and that I feel like is so special, and I feel very emotionally and spiritually connected to. Each year, hundreds of people come to visit from around the world to capture a little bit of what we call the Intervale magic. And it's a place where we really feel like impossible things become possible, and where the whole is much greater than the sum of its parts. So just to give you an organizational kind of overview, we have about a $2 million operating budget. So very similar in size to RDI, which I was noticing during your presentation. Of that $2 million, we're slightly unique in that almost 50% of our budget is earned revenue. And so that is through sale of products and services, and I'll get into more of what those are. About 40% is grants and restricted contributions, so money that's going to specific projects. And then 15% community members and business partnerships, and that number is really growing. So we are trying to sort of lessen our reliance on especially federal grants and sort of build up our revenue as well as our community donations. We have about 20 full-time staff, and we manage 360 acres of land, and that's a combination of land that we lease from the city as well as from the original family that owned all of the land, and some of it we own and is conserved. So in the early years, the Intervale was all lease land from the city of Burlington and from Rena Calkins, who was that dairy farmer that I was talking about. I feel really proud. The Intervale, when it was a dairy farm, it was run, I think it was 50 years, it was a female-run dairy farm, which I think is really awesome, and I think still kind of crops up in a lot of the work that we do. And so in the mid-2000s, we set in motion a conversation with the Vermont Land Trust, the City of Burlington, and a State Housing and Conservation Board, as well as the Calkins family, to purchase and protect the farmstead, which is down on the bottom right. You can kind of see where it says P and the Intervale Center. That's the farmstead area and a chunk of land. So in 2007, we purchased a 200-acre parcel of land and combined it with land donated from the Calkins family, and we now own 232 acres that are perpetually conserved. And then we lease a little bit of additional acreage to add, make it that 350 acres. And it's both farmland. We lease about 120 of it to farmers, but there's also forest land and recreational land as well, and wetlands and parcels that farmers don't want to actually lease from us. And so you can see, it's a little bit hard to see, but those squares, those are where different farm businesses are on our land. So we're the landowner, but we lease land to independent farm businesses. We're not in partnership with them. They're not employees, and we don't actually run a farm as an organization. So we're unique in that we don't have our own farm. We lease land to farms to be able to do that work. So one of the programs that we're probably the most well-known for, but is actually one of our smallest programs in terms of our financials, is our Farm Incubator program. And so that's a big part of my job, is to manage and run that program. And so this is Ben Butterfield. He owns and operates Bestie Field Farm. He started that farm in 2012. And Ben went from, when he started with us, he was working at the hospital as an orderly and really wanted to move out of that work and get into agriculture. He had worked on some farms in the past, and a friend had told him about our program. So the way the process works is he applied, he wrote a business plan. All of our farmers met him and basically have to vote him in through a consensus process. And they all agreed that he was a good applicant based on his experience level, based on the kind of business that he wanted to have. It fit well with our infrastructure. And so he now has about over 1,000 laying hens, somewhere between 1,200 and 1,800 laying hens. And he sells his eggs all around the Burlington community as well as to our food hub. And at the end of 2016, he transitioned his farm out of the Intervale. He was with us for 4 years, and he's now operating on a leased parcel with 2 other farms that are also on that property leasing land. So it's almost like another kind of small collaborative farm model. And I'll just read a quote from Ben that I think is really, summarizes. He says, "I went from being a daydreaming farmer with no land and lots of plans to operating a successful farm business." So you'll see him, he's sort of, in a lot of our promotional materials. He's just a great example of what that program provides. He probably stops by our office or reaches out to me or my colleagues once a week to just sort of talk business ideas, get advice, brainstorm different things. And so that model, farmers can be with us for up to 5 years, and then after 5 years, they transition off. No, so they don't sell. Everybody has their own business, their own brand, their own label. But something that people can say is like Intervale grown, or if they put their address, it will be an Intervale address. And in Burlington, the Intervale definitely has a brand that people, I think, positively associate with. And I think it's a really nice relationship because we certainly help that brand, and we definitely are involved in that because we are the Intervale Center, we're the landowner. But so much of the value of that brand is the farms themselves producing really high quality products, and getting people interested in, oh, well, who are the other Intervale farms there? And so in our leasees, of the 10 farms who lease land from us, it's a combination of farmers who are engaged in this incubator program where they're with us for 5 years, as well as farmers who can be with us for as long as they want. So that farm that started the first community-supported agriculture program in the state, Intervale Community Farm is what they're called, they've been with us for 25 years or so and don't really have any plans to change. So we have, it's sort of this, I think of it a little bit like a patchwork quilt of, kind of stable mentor tenants who are really some of the most established, most successful farm businesses, I think, in the whole state, who serve a mentorship role statewide, as well as these new businesses kind of sprinkled in. And that also has its complications because everybody wants to stay, and we don't have a pathway into becoming a mentor. So any new tenant on the land is an incubator. And we're also part of a national incubator network. So all of these green dots on this map are kind of self-defined farm incubator programs in the country. And we, like to think we've consulted and shared resources with a lot of these organizations. And basically the way this network works is it's an education and technical assistance network. We have lots of webinars. We have an annual conference every year. We also now have regional groups. We're the lead for the Northeast regional group. And most of the programs kind of divide up into programs that are specifically working with refugee clientele, and then those who are working with American-born, and then some who are doing both. And that's definitely a network. If anybody's interested in getting engaged in this incubator work, this is a great place to go and learn a lot of the nuts and bolts of how to do this. Yeah. Yeah, we've worked with a number of Canadian organizations. I don't know specifically who those are off the top of my head, but it also encompasses some Canadian. Some of the funding is specifically allocated for the U.S., so it can make it a little complicated, but yes. So another one of our programs, and one of the ones that really brings in a lot of that earned revenue that I was talking about, is our conservation nursery. So for over 10 years, we've addressed the complicated relationship between farmland and water by planting trees to restore riparian buffers between farm fields and rivers. And these buffers of forested land guard against erosion, they provide natural habitat, they sequester carbon, they filter runoff. And since 2001, we've planted over 100,000 trees along Vermont's waterways. This year, we're slated to plant between 30 and 40,000. So we're really, really ramping up that kind of enterprise of our organization. And the demand that we see in this work is crazy. Like by June, we're pretty much sold out of trees. And it's all native trees, native species to Vermont, and we go out and either collect seeds in the forest or take cuttings of wild trees in the woods. And we have a greenhouse, and then we plant them in the field and we harvest them bare root. And then either sell them to landowners, but the most of them we also go out and plant them. And we have I think an 80% plus survival rate. And a lot of the impetus for this came out of our state nursery shutting down and no longer being available for people to buy trees from. And so we saw this as an opportunity. And so they're a combination of sales of those trees as well as grant revenue. And the grant revenue allows them to do things like we did a project a couple years ago where we removed all of the plastic tree tubes in one area of the state that were planted with trees that could, if there was a flood, could potentially, get removed and end up in our waterways. And so that's not something that we're going to get paid for by a consumer or by a client, but we were able to get grant revenue to do that kind of work. And this is a place where we engage a lot of our business partnerships. So one thing we can offer businesses who we get grants from is the opportunity to come out once a month on a Friday and work with us planting trees, harvesting trees, weeding. And so a lot of our bigger businesses in Burlington, our for-profit businesses, really love that. They come out and they have their kind of like day in the dirt have fun. We have a food truck come. And so it's a really nice opportunity and also great volunteer labor for us. And so the largest majority of our earned revenue is coming from the Intervale Food Hub. And so in 2007, we wanted to open the local market for food even wider. Vermont currently ranks #1 for direct marketing, but we still import about 93% of our food from out of the state. We're trying to grow it from 5% food consumed is produced locally up to 10%. And so our goal was to create an enterprise that would simultaneously help farmers increase local food production and viability and help consumers engage more in their local food movement and, more easily be able to be a customer. And so we also really at the root of this work is building a social enterprise that pays employees well and could be a model for other communities. And so it started out through some research, and the Intervale Food Hub was born out of that research. And we also like to say that, I think we also played a role in sort of the food hub movement across the U.S. and I think in Canada as well. And so we now currently aggregate and distribute food from about 40 different farms in Vermont. We actually, I think, are now getting some early season cucumbers from a farmer in Quebec as well. And it's primarily through retail direct to consumer. So you sign up online for a vegetable share. It gets packed in a basket. We put it on this truck. You can see Kendall, our marketing coordinators, holding the basket, and it gets delivered to your place of work or to a library. So it's mostly community drop-off sites. We have just launched a direct to home delivery option, which I think we are only at about 40 members. It's very, very new. And so it's mostly, large companies like Burton Snowboards, the city, the universities and colleges in town. And so the Food Hub has returned over $2 million to Vermont farmers and producers and is committed to providing fair prices for its producers, quality, locally grown vegetables, meat, and other value-added products, and also supporting its staff. So I think a lot about this model because of my work working with individual farmers and having worked on farms. And, you could potentially run the Food Hub much more on a much slimmer budget than we run it on. People could be not taking lunch breaks. People could be, running around really stressed. And that, I've been in those environments working on farms, working in slaughterhouses, and that's kind of how it goes. That's how you survive. But the Food Hub is really focused on, can we create this model that's both sustainably viable while also providing a high quality of workplace employment. And so it's an enterprise, just like the Nursery, it's embedded in our nonprofit. And they'll sell about $600,000 worth of food, and they have about $600,000 worth of expenses as well. So they're just at about break even. And in 2016, we launched a partnership with the food service provider at the University of Vermont, Sodexo, which is a multinational, to be able to provide food to them. And so basically we took on the higher level of insurance, we took on a good manufacturing practices audit, and sort of we took on a lot of that risk and expense, and now we aggregate product from our farms and provide it and sell it to UVM, which is not something our farmers individually would be able to do because of both quantity that is needed by the school as well as all of those regulatory hurdles. So another part of our work that we do is our gleaning program. So we operate a gleaning program that organizes volunteers to head into the field to harvest what farmers have left behind. Are people familiar with gleaning? And so we mostly work with Intervale farmers who are right there. We work with a couple other nearby vegetable farmers. And so we go out and we harvest what farmers didn't feel like it was worth it to harvest based on the cost. And then we aggregate it and we distribute it to about 175 families in the Burlington area. And it's about 20 weeks that they receive shares. So these are just some examples of what they're getting. They're really getting a nice variety: watermelon, tomatoes, they're getting herbs. And this is all grant funded. It operates on a pretty lean budget. Lots of volunteers, really only one or two staff people. But this is a great way where we're kind of engaging in the food access world and also taking advantage of our infrastructure that we have through the Food Hub. So we have a large truck. We have a large facility that we built and put up in 2012 that was kind of a step up from the original facility we were using for the Food Hub. So this is helping to support some of that infrastructure. So we recently hosted Alice Waters from Edible Schoolyard and Chez Panisse in California. And she has a quote that we really love that says, "This is the power of gathering. It inspires us delightfully to be more hopeful, more thoughtful, and in a word, more alive." That's 2 words, but that was her quote. So, we think a lot as an organization, how do we harness the power of gathering and unleash that power? And how do we inspire more and more people to engage in their local food and their local farms, eat great food, think about kind of that magic and that importance that happens when you engage with your working landscape. And so, the way that we do that is by building this really successful local food event. So every Thursday in the evening in July and August, our first one is July 6th, we host a local food festival called Summervale. These are a couple of our Summervale attendees eating popsicles made by a local berry farm. And we get about 1,000 people, 1,000 to 1,500 people who come down every Thursday night. There's music, there's food. Many of the food vendors who are there are business partners with us. There's drinks provided by local cideries and breweries and organic juice makers, kids activities. And so, we see this as a way for the general public really to engage in our organization because farmers kind of know who we are. If you're selling to the Food Hub, you know who we are. If you are interested in nurseries or you're buying trees, you know who we are. But there's, a lot of people who might not ever come down and walk on our trails or go to our pick your own farms. And this is really the way that those people engage with us is Summervale. So whether running a food hub or providing free food through the gleaning program to our community or hosting these gatherings every year, we're really focused completely on getting people fully engaged in the farm and food economy. And our teams worked, really for the past 10 years on this element of our work, and we've made really huge progress. Mother Earth News essentially wrote in 2016 that the food movement in Burlington owes its success to the Intervale Center. So now I'm going to go in to our farm business services and talk a little bit more in depth about this. So in addition, I've spoke about our food hub, I've spoke about our conservation nursery, our farm incubator program, our gleaning program, our community engagement. But another large part of what we do is farm business support. And so this is a document that I really like to sort of explain our services. So you can see we work with businesses all the way from the conceptual stage through startup, through kind of operating stage, through exit and transition. So our organization does that. And then we also have a lot of partner organizations in the state that also do that. And so you can see those listed here. Our NOFA Vermont, which is our certifying agency, our land trust, our extension service from University of Vermont. And so we really try to support people with business planning at any stage. And we try to really reduce the kind of paperwork and qualifications that people need. If they call us and they need some support, we just try to help them in that moment. And part of what allows us to do that is really flexible funding, which I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on. And so there's about 3 of us that provide direct business planning services. I focus on supporting beginning farmers. My colleague, Sam, he supports larger operating farms as well as a lot of transition. His time is spent a lot currently on transfer planning. And then we also have a person that really focuses on land access. So land access is an area that we've gotten into in more detail in the last few years. So this is John and Melissa from Clearfield Farm. They're some clients of mine. Clearfield Farm is in Granville, Vermont, which is a town of about 300 people, a fairly isolated town in a valley. They've been telling me how excited all these older people in the community are that they're there. And they're like, we haven't really seen anyone else our age, but So they recently moved from Pennsylvania and accessed this land through the Vermont Land Trust. It's a conserved parcel. They're going to be growing diversified vegetables, flowers, pumpkins. They're focusing this year really on salad greens, pumpkins. They're on kind of a tourist road where people come in the fall, especially to look at the leaves changing. And so I've been supporting them a lot with helping with their business plan, helping get them connected to different resources in Vermont, as well as helping them through the purchase process. So they don't currently own the farm. They're currently leasing it for $0 from the Vermont Land Trust. And they're in the process of working with agricultural lenders to figure out how they're going to purchase the farm. So they're just a good example of kind of that early stage client that we work with. I just wanted to show one of the things that we've engaged in recently is Vermont Land Link. Do you guys have land linking websites here in British Columbia? No? So I know there's one in California, and I think they're starting in Washington and Oregon, but basically we sort of joke that it's like an online dating site for farmland owners and farmers. So you can see, you can go on and list a profile as a farmer. That's a new feature. And then farm owners can list properties that are either for sale or for rent. So I mostly see this as valuable for people who want to rent their land because there's not a lot of other places for them to post that. Properties for sale would likely be found on, regular real estate websites or through the Vermont Land Trust. And this was a program that was originally operated through the Extension Service, and the Extension Service was going to drop it because they no longer had the capacity to run it. And we sort of said, wait, this is a really important resource for us because we post our available land on there. We know a lot of people who have found land on there, so we took it over, and we've kind of been revamping it. So going into a little more detail, our service providing for farmers, the goals for that programming is really around building management capacity and increasing confidence and decision-making skills. So we focus less on kind of job creation, increase in profitability, only because we tend to see those things like 10 years down the line, not, a year or 2 years after we've been working with somebody. And so the main area of work that I do with beginning farmers is connecting them with resources in the state. I do a lot of financial statement explanation and education, helping people develop cash flows and balance sheets, helping them write their business plan, holding their hand a bit through the lending process, land access, and then production skills and knowledge. And what allows for kind of this broad array of support through our farm business planning, as well as the kind of flexibility in terms of outcomes and having the outcomes be based more on kind of management and confidence and decision-making skills, is our funder. So we have a really interesting organization in Vermont called the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And it was started in 1987. And it's a kind of a pseudo-governmental organization. It was written into statute that a portion of the property transfer tax would go to supporting this organization. And so since 87, when it started, about $284 million have been invested by VHCB, the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, into these grant funds that go into housing, go into conservation, and go into farm business planning. And they also get a little bit of grant funding and additional funding in addition to that property transfer tax. So the Vermont Farm and Forest Viability Program is a sub-program of the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And so basically they allocate that funding out to different organizations. So we are one of their organizations. We get about $200,000 a year to work with about 50 farms, and that's a combination of both our own staff time as well as consulting money. And so, it's business and transfer planning services. It's really targeted technical assistance, such as helping people with, working with QuickBooks, bookkeeping systems, branding, website stuff. And they not only work with farm businesses, but also with food systems businesses and forestry and forest product businesses. So we don't work as much in the forest industry. We are focused on the farm industry. So they basically, the Farm and Forest Viability Program, which is part of this government organization, they do the enrollment and the sort of paperwork side of it, and then they send farms to us. So they say, this person has enrolled, can you work with them? And so those are about the 50 farms that we work with in a year. And the advisors that they provide money to are organizations like ourselves, nonprofits, as well as individual consultants. So I work with a lot of private business consultants. And the full process is about 2 years, and it costs anywhere between $11,000 and $17,000 per farm between staff time and consultants. And they've worked with about 645 farms throughout that process. And it's a mix of all, they do work with about 50% dairies. Our state is mainly dairy farms, and then about 25% vegetables and 15% is a mix of other things. So the other partner that I wanted to talk about, in addition to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board, is the Vermont Land Trust. So the Vermont Land Trust has been really critical in our state in helping beginning farmers access land. So both farmers that are coming out of our Incubator program, as well as people who have been leasing land elsewhere or have been working on other farms. And so they have an innovative program that's called the Farmland Access Program. And what that looks like is a farm will come up for sale, and that will either be, the land trust will either take ownership of the farm itself, or they'll just help the current owner who's trying to sell it with this process, and they'll put out a request for proposal for the property. And so they'll say, here's the property, here's the topography, here's the price, and then they'll ask people to submit proposals. And we help a lot of people with those proposals, with preparing those, and then they'll choose a farm from that list. And so they're very kind of mindfully placing different farm businesses on to different conserved parcels. And part of what makes this unique is that the property is not only conserved, so the development rights have been sold, but they've also launched an innovative conservation program that's called, we call it in Vermont, OPAV, option to purchase at agricultural value. And basically what that means is it's an additional amount of money that the landowner can choose to sell to the land trust. And what it says is that it's not only has to be the land can not only not be developed, but there has to be an active farmer on the property. So the person who's on the property has to be making at least 50% of their household income from the farm. And this program was built to address an issue that we see in Vermont, an issue we also see in the Hudson Valley in New York, and I imagine is something that you see here, which is, properties might be conserved, and so their assessed value may be lower than if they could be chunked up and developed, but you're still just going to get the highest bidder is still going to win out. And so we were getting a lot of people from out of state coming in and buying these properties and not actually really farming them. And so this has allowed for, it sort of limits the pool of people who can be on this land to people who are making at least 50% of their income from farming. And so it's been it's created a much more affordable property for farmers. Some of the challenges that we're seeing with it is that if people are building houses, they're not getting 100% of the kind of value of building that house back because you, again, have this kind of limited pool that you're selling your property to. But it's really meant to keep these farms in actual active farm production in perpetuity. So we work extremely close with the Vermont Land Trust, and I think other states like Massachusetts and some other states are now starting to pilot this program. So that's really all I had for you. I think maybe we can take another 5 minutes just because we had that tech issue, and I'll take some questions.